Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Scott Martin. I'm President and CEO of Norman Chamber of Commerce. I'm not sure that it's Chamber of Commerce weather, nor do I have a Chamber of Commerce voice today, so I apologize for my raspiness. It's allergies. But this is an exciting day for our community, our university, and certainly our country as we come to recognize this incredible partnership that's been developed. Recently, I had the opportunity to share a few words about a NOAA radar that we recently cut the ribbon on. And I spoke at that event about the incredible partnership and the idea of connecting the dots, .com, .edu, and .gov. And I can't think of a better place than Norman and the university and our government partners that embodies that partnership better. We see it over and over and over again, particularly down here in the research campus. And today, as we celebrate this occasion, this is another great example of connecting the dots and the incredible things that come out of when true partnership happens. So on behalf of the Chamber of Commerce, I appreciate each of you being here. Thank you for letting us be part of this particular occasion. President Gallogly, Dean Moore, Administrator Bridenstine, thank you for being here. And of course, just the incredible things that's happening under your watch and these two gentlemen's watch also. So thank you so much. And at this time, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Dean Berrien Moore.
Well, this is really a grand occasion, and it's a particularly exciting time for us. And what we have to recognize that like many grand adventures, that this is not really due to a person. It really is due to a team. And that team, in many ways, begins with the two Jims, Jim Gallogly and Jim Bridenstine. Without that part of the team, then the rest of us would not know how to go forward. But the other part of our team is right here, and I'd like to begin with Randy Hughes, Vice President of Research, Lisa Callahan from Lockheed Martin, Eric Jensen from NASA headquarters. I should mention that Eric has been very, very important to us because he heads flight programs for Earth Sciences. And one of the challenges and one of the opportunities for us is that we're going to go on a non-NASA bus. And so when your flight program is having to say, well, I don't know about this, but it sounds sporting, that has been part of that kind of grand team. Shelley Finley is our Deputy Program Manager. Sean Crowell is our Chief Scientist. Keith Schlick is Mission Assurance. And I can't tell you how important that is from Lockheed to have someone really bringing mission assurance, because mission success is the name of the game at Lockheed. Kyle Harper, our provost, who has been studying climate longer than any of us, or at least studying climate of ancient civilizations longer than any of us. Dean Reed, my program manager, who has just been marvelous because he really brought that experience that we needed. And then, as we always have, in terms of our board of advisors, in this sense, a regent. Phil is with us, Phil Albert, and I think there's a connectivity here that is very, very important, and we deeply appreciate that. There are many others that I'd like to invite, but I really would like rather to spend about 2 seconds on the nature of this mission and what makes it special. And I mentioned this, the main thing that we're doing here that is very different, and I should say it's sporting, and that is we're going to go on a commercial satellite. We're going to go on a geostationary satellite. We're going to go on a satellite whose orbit is 22,500 miles away from the planet. And we're going to fly an instrument that is very similar to an instrument that NASA is currently flying out of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, called the Orbiting Carbon Observatory. And that instrument is in low Earth orbit. And the way that instrument works is it takes reflected sunlight off the planet and looks down in certain colors, in certain wavelengths, And by looking at the wavelengths in which CO2 absorbs energy, and knowing how much energy we should be getting back because we're looking at other wavelengths, you're able to measure how much CO2 there is in the atmosphere. But that turns out not to be what you really want. You would like to get the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere. So that means you got to make another sporting measurement. And that is you have to measure the total amount of atmosphere. So I've got the total amount of CO2 in a column of atmosphere. Now I got to get the total amount of atmosphere. So you look down in the wavelength that oxygen absorbs energy. And you could make that measurement. What the Orbiting Carbon Observatory discovered was you see something else when you look in that oxygen wavelength. And I just wish that we could see in that wavelength, because what you see in that wavelength is vegetation fluoresces. So just imagine as we approach the holiday season, Halloween, or other holidays, when you decorate trees, you wouldn't need to decorate the tree. The tree would just be fluorescing for you. And so in that wavelength, you see vegetation fluorescence. And that can be tied to photosynthesis. And clouds are transparent in that wavelength. So that means that you can see all the time in that wavelength. Well, what GeoCarb does is it adopts that instrument that came out of NASA and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Lockheed Martin is building the instrument for us, and then we added a fourth color, a fourth wavelength, in which we could see carbon monoxide and methane. So now we see all three of the big carbon gases, CO2, methane, and carbon monoxide. We see solar-induced fluorescence, and we fly out in geostationary orbit. And when you see later a film, you'll get a feeling for how this works. We look down at the Americas. And for instance, we look down at the North America. And we look down with a slit. And so that slit is about 8 kilometers wide, and it's 2,500 kilometers north-south, and we break the light up, and we stare for 9 seconds. And then we move that slit over, and we stare for 9 seconds. And with that, we get the same signal to noise, the same accuracy that the low Earth orbiting, the Orbiting Carbon Observatory gets. But now we're sitting out and we're mapping the 48 states. And then we map Central, and then we map all of the South America. And then we do that every day, wall to wall, mapping how much CO2, how much methane, how much CO is in the atmosphere. So as a great weather place, we're essentially mapping carbon weather. We're seeing it at weather time scales, which will teach us a great deal about how the carbon cycle really works. So that is, in a nutshell, GeoCarb. This was something that was very tough to compete for. In fact, when they first came out with an announcement of opportunity for this Earth venture, I was working with Lockheed Martin, and I had gone to Asia to find a commercial partner to fly this mission. And that was in 2010. And this was before I was at the University of Oklahoma. I was thinking about this, and in 2010, in late 2010, the announcement of opportunity came out, and it said, if you want to do a hosted payload, your host has to agree to use an American rocket. And I called the person with whom I was working in Japan about would they agree to that. And he said very politely, he said, I think you have a phrase. And I said, what's that? And he said, you've got to be kidding. And I said, well, no, this is a requirement. And he said, no, we're not interested. So Lockheed, and we had to close up shop, and we didn't even submit a proposal. And then a year and a half later, NASA came back out with an announcement of opportunity, but just for the instrument. And so we said, let's dust off our proposal and submit for the instrument, and we did, and we lost. And then we did that 18 months later, we submitted, and we lost. And you get a debrief during these times, and you're told why you lose. And I remember telling my wife that I had gone down, and NASA tried to talk to me, and I said, I told them why they were idiotic, why they made a mistake, what they should have done. And my wife said, and this is a true story, my wife said, well, isn't it interesting? It takes us only 2 years to learn how to talk and 70 years to learn how to listen. Why don't you contact the people that were in the room with you and ask them, what did NASA say about why you lost? I mean, there may be some information there. And we did that. And so when the Earth mission came out again for the whole thing, there was no language about using an American rocket. I'd finally, after 70 years, learned how to listen. And I had a great team. And so we proposed, and we were fortunate enough to get the magical phone call in 2016. In fact, when I saw the phone call was coming in, and it was from NASA headquarters, and I was at a tough budget meeting in 2016. And so I looked at it, and I said, I do not need to hear this again. So I just turned my cell phone off. And with that, then my assistant, Leanne, came to me and said, you know, you better take that call. They're just talking to me on my cell phone. And so we took the call, and since then, this great team have been making really significant progress. And we're very excited to have the administrator here, but we're particularly pleased to have Jim Gallogly here, 14th president of the University of Oklahoma, a person that brings a deep affection to this university. He brings a close relationship with our partners, and that is something that is very important to us. And his commitment, stated day one, to research and graduate education and excellence is something that I truly value. So, Jim Gallogly, turn it to you for a moment.
Berrien, thank you so much for explaining that very simple concept to everyone. Why was that so difficult? Isn't it interesting how people that are as smart as Berrien, so many of you in the room, can take a simple concept like that, that's really so incredibly complex, and make it something we can understand? Well, I'd like to tell you something that's a very simple concept that's easy to understand too. This project is incredibly important to the University of Oklahoma, and this is a brilliant day no matter what the weather looks like outside. In fact, today we're dedicating this project, which is the single largest contract ever in our university's history, to put that in perspective. All of you today are sitting here as part of a historic moment of epic proportions. We have a $161 million grant from NASA, so succinctly described just a moment ago. We're thrilled to have Jim Bridenstine with us today, the administrator of NASA, because this is such an important project to our United States government as well. This project is going to pave the way for a new and low cost, something I'm always talking about, new low cost Earth observation research, and this has the potential to spawn mission after mission after mission. This is just the beginning of what we plan to do. We're going to be measuring greenhouse gases and vegetation from space. I used to sit on the board of DuPont and listen to some of the scientists talk about how we're using drones now to look at fields, to see how fertilizer is being spread, how the moisture is accumulating, how the crops are coming, using drones a few hundred yards up. And when I was working for ConocoPhillips, we were trying to study whether platforms were subsiding in the North Sea and try to understand, because of the influence of tides, how to measure whether we were in fact sinking. And somebody suggested you can get absolutely perfect measurements from space, from a satellite. And you could do that from a satellite instead of measuring on the ground with absolute precision accuracy. And today we're bringing those concepts together in a very, very interesting way to accomplish reviewing the Earth's atmosphere from space. Since July 1, our our university has announced $116 million in research grants from places like the Department of Defense, Department of Education, NSF, NOAA, NASA, a variety of places, $116 million so far in just about 100 days. We're going to be doubling the research here at the University of Oklahoma, doubling the amount of research we do here in 5 years. You've heard me talk about that. This is one of the cornerstones of how that can happen. And as I said, this project will lead to that project and more and more and more. And across the campus, those same things are going to happen to the benefit of our faculty, to the benefit of our students and our staff, but most importantly, to the benefit of Oklahoma, our nation, and the world. These are that kind of projects that influence the entire world. OU can become the growth engine of our state. Someone was visionary in hiring someone like Berrien some years ago, and then some of the rest of the people on the faculty in this group, and out of it has spawned a weather center and project after project after project like this. And we'd like to do that in so many other areas of our university to make wonderful things happen. You have truly become one of our growth engines, Berrien, and the Weather Center, something that we're so incredibly proud of. Because we are a university primed for growth and success. Berrien, congratulations on this. I know this was a tremendous amount of work. You never took no for an answer. And as a result of that, here we are today with a great success. Jim, thank you so much for your belief in us. We will not let NASA down. We will not let Lockheed Martin down or any of the other participants. We will partner with you. We will be successful in this mission. And this is such a critical mission. You know, when I was listening to you speak, Berrien, I was thinking about the stars, and I looked up. And when doing that, I see this triple halo. I think maybe that's a sign. Congratulations to all of us. Thank you.
Well, it gives me a particular pleasure now to introduce Jim Bridenstine. We've had a relationship with Jim when he was in Congress in a very important way. We had discussions about the use of geostationary satellites with Jim Bridenstine and with Regent. That was very important to us because I was at that time working on this idea. But to have him come back to Oklahoma really is very thrilling. It's also important to welcome someone that has had quite an interesting career, would you say. Went to Rice University for his undergraduate work, Cornell for his MBA, naval pilot, which is really quite a combination there. And then took the executive directorship of the Air and Space and the Planetarium Museum in Tulsa, which was, I think, the mosquito that bit the congressman-to-be with his love of what the space program could truly be. And then, of course, he was the congressman from Tulsa and then the NASA administrator. At an earlier stage, he was, as I said today, not only an Eagle Boy Scout, but holds the 200-meter swimming record for the state of Oklahoma, which I think is really quite a combination. I would not imagine there are many other congresspersons, and I don't believe there's ever been a NASA administrator that had a swimming record. It might have served some of them well, but I don't think that ever happened. But anyway, we're just delighted to have Administrator Bridenstine here to participate in the unveiling and the ribbon cutting, but also just to share, again, having someone from Oklahoma in Norman. Jim Bridenstine.
Just for the record, Any records that Dr. Berrien Moore speaks of have not been appropriately peer-reviewed, and I cannot say definitively whether or not I hold any records at all, and I am quite frankly doubtful that I do. If I do, it is probably a relay, not an individual event at this point. But Dr. Berrien Moore, thank you for the great introduction. President Gallogly, thank you for your leadership of this institution. I'd also like to recognize a friend from my side of the state. I come from Tulsa. That's the area that I represented in the U.S. Congress. Representative Mark Lepak and his wife Linda are both here from my side of the state. And of course, it's great to have state representation here as well. So it's great to be back in the state of Oklahoma. It doesn't hurt that it's Halloween, and tonight I get to go out and trick-or-treat with my 12-year-old, my 10-year-old, and my 6-year-old. So that's an added benefit of this event. But what an honor to be here. What a great day for the University of Oklahoma. I loved the statement earlier that we need to connect the dots. And I'm going to steal that if that's okay. .edu, .com, and .gov. We need to connect the dots. I love that. Can I steal that? Permission? You stole it. Okay. So I'll be stealing from a thief. It's all good. So that's a wonderful way to put it. And I'll share with you some of my history, not necessarily in GeoCarb, but in the idea that GeoCarb is. When I was in the House of Representatives, I had the opportunity to be the chairman of the Environment Subcommittee on the Science Committee. And in that capacity, my responsibility was to oversee NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, which has about 40% of their budget dedicated to space-related activities. One of the major, there was a critically important satellite for the state of Oklahoma that was necessary to feed what we call numerical weather models so that we can predict weather, so we can predict severe storms. And we had a period of time when our current satellite in low Earth orbit was at the end of its useful life. This is a satellite, again, that feeds 80% of the data into our numerical weather models, and it was at the end of its useful life, and its successor was well over budget, well behind schedule, was having problems with very specific instruments, and because of that, it was at risk. There was a risk that we would have no satellite in low Earth orbit to feed those numerical weather models. Now, gratefully, we have international partners that also have satellites that feed our models. But the important thing here is, if this particular satellite in orbit failed, and the next one was not placed in orbit yet, we would lose the ability to predict about 25% of the severe storms in the state of Oklahoma. And for all of us who are Oklahomans, that's a really big deal. We have constituents every year here in Oklahoma that are killed in tornadoes. So I resolved that I was going to do something as the chairman of this subcommittee to make sure that we build resilience into the system. And one of the things that I started focusing on, that Dr. Berrien Moore capitalized on, was the idea of hosting mission instruments, hosting payloads on commercial satellites. We have this long history at NASA and other agencies in the federal government of desiring to launch our own satellites, that in some cases we take a satellite bus and we pack instrument on top of instrument on top of instrument, and we build these Battlestar Galactica multi-million and 100 million plus, in some cases, billion-dollar satellites that pack all of the risk onto one rocket launch. Well, that's a lot of risk. We're talking about, in some cases, billion-plus dollars. Well, let's distribute the architecture. Instead of packing all of these instruments onto one satellite, here's what we know. We know that commercial satellites are going to be launching into orbit. In some cases, they're going to launch into low Earth orbit. In other cases, they're going to launch to geostationary orbit. But they're doing it to provide services to the public, whether it's internet from space or television from space or remote sensing for some purpose. These satellites are going to be launched. That means that you have a bus that has a power system, potentially a propulsion system. It will have a rocket that launches it into space. So what we can do is we can take these critically important mission capabilities and pack them onto a satellite that is already going to be launching. And what that enables us to do is take all of these different mission sets and put them on different satellites and distribute the architecture not only spatially, but also distribute it based on mission sets and other things that ultimately will feed numerical weather models or any host of other missions that are necessary for our country. So I got really involved and activated to try to distribute the architecture, to buy, in some cases, commercial data, to take advantage of weather satellites that were being launched for the transportation industry, for the agriculture industry, for the insurance industry, for the entertainment industry. There are no kidding markets right now for data that are going to feed numerical weather models that are not owned and operated by the government, but owned and operated by private industry. And these satellites themselves would be owned and operated by private industry. And every one of these industries is trying to get an advantage over their competitors, and they're trying to be able to predict weather better than the others. So in my view, let's buy commercial data, and when possible, if we need a government payload, let's put it on a commercial satellite that we already know is going to launch and reduce the risk and drive down the cost. Well, that's ultimately what GeoCarb does. Berrien talked eloquently about the importance of the mission. We're going to understand from geostationary orbit, we're going to understand carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, methane. And the reason geostationary orbit is important is because as the Earth turns, the satellite is in the exact same spot over the Earth, even as the Earth is turning, which means it's going to be able to dwell. And it's going to be able to get real-time information, not just day to day, but hour to hour, as to what is happening with those compounds in the atmosphere of the Earth. It's a powerful tool that we haven't had before. It's a powerful tool that I think is necessary and appropriate for us to understand Earth as a system. But in this case, we're not just doing that amazing science. We're doing it for a fraction of the cost that the government would be paying if it was to launch its own free flyer. We have a commercial communication satellite that is launching to geostationary orbit to deliver direct TV or dish network or internet broadband from space. It has power, it has propulsion, it has the ability to share data, to send data back to Earth. Well, now NASA is going to have an instrument on that commercial satellite that's being launched on a commercial launch for the purposes of delivering services to the public, driving down our cost, reducing our risk, enabling us to do more as an agency than we could otherwise do. That frees up our cash to do even more, and maybe another GeoCarb mission in the future. I don't know, but it's possible. So these are all things that I'm very proud of. What's interesting is this. The University of Oklahoma is very fortunate to have Dr. Berrien Moore, because what he did is he saw what direction we were working in Congress, and he capitalized on it for the university by putting forward a mission. As a principal investigator, he gets to submit projects, and then NASA determines what projects are the best. He gets to put them forward. What he did is he took something that was very important to Congress, something that was very important to NASA, and he made it into a mission for the University of Oklahoma and brought in partners, a commercial satellite company, Lockheed Martin, and others to pull this all together. So what an amazing accomplishment. The biggest contract the University of Oklahoma has ever had from the government. And ultimately, what an opportunity for me as the NASA administrator. Look, I wish I could take credit for all of this, but I can't. I will, but I can't. All of this was put into place long before I was here, but I would like to say maybe I had a little piece of it when I was a member of Congress advocating for these very important capabilities with disaggregation and utilizing commercially hosted payloads on commercial satellites. So thank you all for being here. It's an honor to be able to participate in this event, and I'm looking forward to this unveiling. Before we do that, I have some things I would like to present. Dr. Gallogly, if you would come forward and maybe stand in front of the podium here. We have these silver achievement medals from NASA to the GeoCarb Acquisition Support Team for exceptional support in awarding the Geostationary Carbon Cycle Observatory contract on a significantly accelerated schedule to preserve a mission critical for a launch window. To be clear, remember, this payload is launching on a commercial satellite. that commercial satellite is not going to wait for this payload. They've got money to make, and they intend to make it. But to the extent that you are able to get this contract and get it early and do what was necessary, NASA is exceptionally grateful. And for that, we have this Silver Achievement Medal for you, Mr. Gallogly, and of course, Dr. Berrien Moore, and the entire team that put together this GeoCarb mission. Thank you, sir. Yeah. So I'll give you one. Can we get the acquisitions team to come up? Okay.
All right. Okay. President, Administrator, can you join me over here? Now, I just hope there's something under here. This is really quite an honor because when you envision doing something, many times you're not sure just what it is that you're thinking about. And it's only when you actually begin to see the reality of this that we move from PowerPoint to something that you can touch it. So if everyone would join us in the celebration, we'll take off the and we'll pass. Now, this is, I want to say it's upside down, but that really doesn't make much sense, of course. But when on orbit, in the daytime, this will open up, and light will come down, and it'll be split off into two wavelengths over here and two wavelengths here. And then we have what we might think of as a digital camera made by a great talented team at Teledyne at Dallas, California that will provide the detectors, that is what you need for your digital camera. And that will give us those concentration, that information that allows us to get concentrations. These will give us a position by looking at stars. And this is essentially the front end of the telescope. So what we want to make sure happens is that when we get to orbit, we sure want to make sure this is what happens. But I have great faith in Lockheed that ensure that we don't stay like this, but this is what happens. And of course, it's marvelous. The satellite at nighttime, it does go slow, so this is what happens, and then we open it back up. But anyway, we'd be delighted to have you look at this. We're very proud. This was all done with 3D printing here at the university. And so this is also another exciting thing for being brought together. So if we're ready to do ribbon cutting, we need a ribbon, I guess.
Can I make one request for everyone? It would be very, very nice if there were an OU symbol right here.
Well, actually, I wanted something a bit more, and this, particularly after this year, I wanted the OU symbol, and then I want to say, beat Texas.
I would support that.
Good. Join us here, please. Yes. Yes. Jump in. You've got some connection here too. We've had a lovely time with our regent because we did have discussion of a hosted payload a couple of years ago, and you brought great spirit to that discussion. I sure appreciate it. Anyway, so I guess we say let's mission success, go GeoCarb, cut the ribbon, and we keep some of this ribbon. Okay, if our guest, everyone, can join us in GeoCarb.